Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to Ancient Epics, the place where the greatest stories of humanity come back to life. Imagine this. On a cold autumn night in 1820, in a quiet New York farmhouse lit only by whale oil lamps, a young surveyor and failed playwright named Washington Irving dipped his quill into ink and began writing a tale so chilling that, within weeks, grown men in the Hudson Valley refused to ride alone after dark. Farmers found broken pumpkins smashed along lonely roads, horses returned to stables sweating with terror, and for decades afterward, mothers hushed crying children by whispering a single name, the Headless Horseman. What very few people know today is that Irving did not invent the ghost. He merely gave flesh, or the absence of it, to a nightmare that had already haunted the Dutch settlers for almost 200 years, a nightmare born from real cannon fire on real battlefields, from a severed Hessian head buried somewhere beneath the soil of Sleepy Hollow, and from an ancient Celtic belief carried across the Atlantic in the hearts of frightened immigrants. Tonight, under a frost-touched moon, let us walk once again ride those misty lanes where the veil between the living and the restless dead has always been tissue-thin. In the closing years of the 18th century, hidden among the gentle folds of the Hudson River Valley, lay a secluded glen the old Dutch settlers called Tarrytown, though its true name, whispered in Low German, was Greensburg. A little farther up the river, where the waters widen into a broad bay known as the Tappan Zee, a small market village clung to the eastern bank, but the heart of the enchantment lay 2 miles deeper into the woods, in a quiet hollow the Dutch simply called Sleepy Hollow, the Sleepy Hollow. Even today, if one drives north from Manhattan along the old post road, now called Broadway, and turns east at the Pocantico River, the air seems to grow heavier, the trees older, the light dimmer, as though the valley itself breathes a slow, dreaming breath that has not changed since the glaciers retreated 12,000 years ago. Geologists say the hollow sits in a natural amphitheater carved by the same ice that shaped the fjords of Norway, a place where mists rise from the river every autumn evening and cling to the hills like the smoke of ancient funeral pyres. The Algonquin tribes who once hunted here called it the place where the sky touches the earth, and they avoided camping overnight within its borders, believing the spirits of warriors walked there beneath the stars of Orion. Into this enchanted hollow, sometime around the year 1790, rode a stranger from Connecticut, a lanky young schoolmaster named Ichabod Crane. He was tall, exceedingly tall, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs that dangled like the joints of a marionette, and a small head perched atop a neck so thin and long that the village boys swore a strong breeze might carry it away like a weathercock. His clothes hung upon him in loose folds, the black coat-tails flapping behind him like the wings of an awkward crow, and when he walked the children said he looked like a scarecrow escaped from a cornfield. Yet for all his ungainly appearance, Ichabod possessed a certain sharp cunning. He carried in his own mind a man of learning, having read Cotton Mather's History of New England Witchcraft cover to cover, and he could quote passages from the Psalms with a nasal twang that made the rafters of the little red schoolhouse tremble. He earned his keep by boarding a week at a time with each farmer's family, carrying all his worldly goods in a cotton handkerchief, and in return he taught the children their letters, whipped the unruly ones with a birch switch cut from the riverbank, and when the mood struck him, entertained the farmers' wives with tales of ghosts and goblins told in the flickering candlelight. Ichabod was in short a man who believed in omens, in the power of the stars, and most especially in the power of a well-filled dinner table. Now the farmers of Sleepy Hollow were a prosperous folk, their barns bursting with golden corn and orange pumpkins the size of carriage wheels, their orchards heavy with apples that glowed crimson in the October sun. Ichabod's soul rose with the fragrance of pumpkin pies cooling on windowsills, with the aroma of doughnuts frying in bare fat, with the scent of cider pressing and fresh bread baking. He would linger at the table long after the farmer had returned to his fields, praising the housewife's skill until her cheeks grew as red as the apples in her cellar. And so, moving from house to house, Ichabod grew sleek and contented, his long shanks filling out until the village girls began to notice that, seen from behind at twilight, he almost resembled a respectable. But it was not only food that fed Ichabod's dreams. In the wealthiest farm of the district, the Van Tassel estate, there dwelt a blossoming lass of 18 named Katrina Van Tassel. She was the only child of old Baltus Van Tassel, a stout and blooming farmer whose broad acres stretched along the Hudson and whose barns groaned under the weight of harvest. Katrina was a beauty in the full Dutch style, plump as a partridge, ripe in melting and rosy-cheeked, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of cornflowers. She wore gowns of stiff silk that rustled like the leaves of autumn, and around her neck hung a string of gold beads handed down from her great-grandmother, who had sailed from Amsterdam in 1650. When she rode to church on Sunday in the family's high-backed wagon, the young men of Sleepy Hollow forgot the sermon entirely. Ichabod Crane saw in Katrina not only beauty but the promise of soft beds, endless feasts, and a fortune in land and cattle. From the moment he first beheld her singing psalms in the little stone church at Tarrytown, his heart was lost. There was, however, one considerable obstacle: Abraham Van Brunt, known far and wide as Brom Bones. Brom was the hero of the countryside, broad-shouldered and handsome, with a mane of black hair and a laugh that could shake the rafters of a tavern. He rode a black stallion named Daredevil that was said to be the grandson of the devil's own Mar, and he delighted in wild pranks and midnight races. Brom had already made it clear that Katrina was his, and he looked upon Ichabod with the same expression a lion gives a jackal sniffing around its kill. The rivalry between the two was the talk of the Hollow, though it was a rivalry of a very lopsided sort, for where Ichabod relied on cunning and flattery, Brom relied on sheer strength and mischief. Once, when Ichabod's old horse Gunpowder was found with its mane braided in intricate knots, everyone knew Brom's handiwork. Another time the schoolhouse door was nailed shut from the outside just as Ichabod tried to leave, and the laughter of Brom's gang echoed through the trees long into the night. Autumn deepened, the maples turned scarlet, and the air carried the scent of wood smoke and ripened fruit. Old Baltus Van Tassel, in the generous spirit of the season, announced a great quilting frolic and harvest dance to be held at his mansion on a Friday night when the moon would be full. Farmers came from miles around, their wagons creaking under loads of pumpkin pies, cider barrels, ham smoked over hickory, lanterns of hollowed pumpkins with grinning faces glowed along the driveway. And inside the great barn the fiddlers tuned their instruments while the floorboards shook with the stamp of heavy boots. Katrina, in a gown of peach-colored silk, moved through the crowd like a vision, and Ichabod, in his best and only black suit, danced with her again and again, his long arms flailing like the sails of a windmill. Brom Bones stood in the shadows, his face dark, his fists clenched, watching every step. The night wore on, the dancing grew wilder, the cider flowed freer, and at last the guests began to drift away into the frost-kissed darkness. Ichabod lingered, hoping for a private word with Katrina, but when at last she spoke to him, her words were cool and final. Whatever hope had fluttered in his breast died there in the lantern light. Rejected and humiliated, he slipped out to the stable, untied old Gunpowder, who had been enjoying the remnants of the Van Tassel oats, and rode slowly into the night. The moon hung low and yellow over the treetops, casting long shadows across the winding road that led past the church and into the heart of Sleepy Hollow. Here the valley narrowed, the hills closed in, and the ancient woods pressed close on either side. The Pocantico River murmured over black rocks, and the wind in the hemlocks sounded like the sigh of unquiet souls. Ichabod's imagination, already inflamed by the ghost stories he had heard that very evening, Major Andre's capture, the woman in white who haunted Raven Rock, and above all the tale of the Headless Horseman. The ghost of a Hessian trooper whose head had been carried away by a cannonball during the Revolutionary War and who rode forth on stormy nights in search of it, began to people every shadow with terror. But the old horse, stuffed with Van Tassel oats, was stubborn and slow. Suddenly, from the darkness behind him, came the sound of hoofbeats. Ichabod turned in the saddle and saw, silhouetted against the moon, a huge figure on a powerful black horse. The rider wore a dark cloak that billowed like wings, and where his head should have been, there was nothing. Nothing but the suggestion of a neck rising into empty air. Terror seized Ichabod's heart. He kicked Gunpowder desperately. Through the hollow they thundered, past the old Dutch church where the moonlight fell cold on the gravestones, past the tulip trees said to mark Major Andre's hanging place, toward the bridge over Wiley's swamp where, according to legend, the horseman's power ended. The black horse gained with every stride, its hooves striking sparks from the stones. Ichabod could hear the rider's breath, harsh and labored, like wind through a broken bellows, its wooden planks gleaming silver in the moonlight. Gunpowder clattered across. The horseman had reached the center of the bridge. He raised one arm, and with terrible strength he hurled something large and round directly at Ichabod's head. There was a sickening thud, a flash of orange, and Ichabod tumbled from the saddle into the dust of the road. Dawn broke cold and gray over Sleepy Hollow. A farmer on his way to market found old Gunpowder grazing quietly by the roadside, the reins tangled in a bush. Ichabod's hat lay in the dust nearby, and beside it, crushed and broken, was a shattered pumpkin. Search parties scoured the woods and dragged the river, but no trace of the schoolmaster was ever found. Some said he had fled the valley in shame. Others that the Headless Horseman had claimed another victim and carried Ichabod away to the land of the dead. The little red schoolhouse soon fell into decay, and the children were sent to a new master who did not believe in ghosts. Years passed. Brom Bones married Katrina Van Tassel in a ceremony that lasted 3 days, and whenever the tale of Ichabod's disappearance was told in his presence, a knowing smile would play across his lips, and he would burst into uncontrollable laughter, especially when pumpkins were mentioned. Yet on certain nights in late October, when the moon is full and the mists rise thick from the Pocantico, travelers along that same road still report the thunder of hooves and the fleeting glimpse of a headless rider galloping toward the old bridge, a flaming jack-o'-lantern clutched in his hand, forever searching, forever restless, beneath the ancient watchful stars of autumn. And so the hollow dreams on, wrapped in its ancient spell, where the boundary between the living and the long-departed grows thin as spider silk, and the wind through the hemlock still carries, for those who listen, the faint, fading echo of hoofbeats in the night. If these ancient voices touched your heart today, please consider subscribing to Ancient Epics and ringing the bell so you never miss the next forgotten tale. Thank you for watching.